Hello, my darling, and welcome to today's story time. Today we are reading Pinocchio by Carlo Collodi. If you like what you hear, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Now, on with our story time. Chapter 14. Pinocchio, not having listened to the good advice of the talking cricket, falls into the hands of the assassins. Dear, oh dear, when I come to think of it, said the marionette to himself, as he once more set out on his journey, we boys are very unlucky. Everybody scolds us, everybody gives us advice, everybody warns us. If we were to allow it, everyone would just try to be father and mother to us. Everyone, even the talking cricket. Take me, for example. Just because I would not listen to that bothersome cricket, who knows how many misfortunes may be awaiting me? Assassins indeed. At least, I have never believed in them, nor will I ever. To speak sensibly, I think assassins have been invented by fathers and mothers to frighten children who want to run away at night. And then, even if I were to meet them on the road, what would it matter? I'll just run up to them and say, well, senor, what do you want? Remember, you can't fool with me. Run along and mind your business. At such a speech, I can almost see those poor fellows running like the wind. But in case they don't run away, I can always run myself. Pinocchio was not given time to argue any longer, for he thought he heard a slight rustle among the leaves behind him. He turned to look, and behold, there in the darkness stood two big black shadows, wrapped from head to foot in black sacks. The two figures leapt toward him as softly as if they were ghosts. Here they come, Pinocchio said to himself, and, not knowing where to hide the gold pieces, he stuck all four of them under his tongue. He tried to run away, but hardly had he taken a step when he felt his arms grasped and heard two horrible, deep voices say to him, your money or your life. On account of the gold pieces in his mouth, Pinocchio could not say a word, so he tried, with head and hands and body, to show, as best he could, that he was only a poor marionette without a penny in his pocket. Come, come, less nonsense, and out with your money, cried the two thieves in threatening voices. Once more, Pinocchio's head and hands said, I haven't a penny. Out with that money, or you're a dead man, said the taller of the two assassins. Dead man, repeated the other. And after having killed you, we will kill your father also. Your father also. No, no, not my father, cried Pinocchio, wild with terror. But as he screamed, the gold pieces tickled together in his mouth. Oh, you rascal, so that's the game. You have the money hidden under your tongue. Out with it then. But Pinocchio was as stubborn as ever. Are you deaf? Wait, young man. We'll get it from you in a twinkling. One of them grabbed the marionette by the nose and the other by the chin, and they pulled him unmercifully from side to side in order to make him open his mouth. All was of no use. The marionette's lips might have been nailed together. They would not open. In desperation, the smaller of the two assassins pulled out a long knife from his pocket and tried to pry Pinocchio's mouth open with it. Quick as a flash, the marionette sank his teeth deep into the assassin's hand, bit it off, and spat it out. Fancy his surprise when he saw that it was not a hand, but a cat's paw. Encouraged by his first victory, he freed himself from the claws of his assailers and, leaping over the bushes along the road, ran swiftly across the fields. His pursuers were after him at once, like two dogs chasing a hare. After running 7 miles or so, Pinocchio was well nigh exhausted. Seeing himself lost, he climbed up a giant pine tree and sat there to see what he could see. The assassins tried to climb also, but they slipped and fell. Far from giving up the chase, this only spurred them on. They gathered a bundle of wood, piled it up at the foot of the pine, and set fire to it. In a twinkling, the tree began to sputter and burn like a candle blown by the wind. Pinocchio saw the flames climb higher and higher. Not wishing to end his days as a roasted marionette, he jumped quickly to the ground, and off he went, the assassins close to him as before. Dawn was breaking when, without any warning whatsoever, Pinocchio found his path barred by a deep pool, full of water the color of muddy coffee. What was there to do? With a 1, 2, 3, he jumped clear across it. The assassins jumped also, but not having measured their distance well, splashed. They fell right into the middle of the pool. Pinocchio, who heard the splash and felt it too, cried out, laughing, but never stopping in his race. "A pleasant bath to you, Signor." He thought they must surely be drowned and turned his head to see. But there were the two somber figures still following him, though their black sacks were drenched and dripping with water. Chapter 15. The assassins chase Pinocchio, catch him, and hang him to the branch of a giant oak tree. As he ran, the marionette felt more and more certain that he would have to give himself up into the hands of his pursuers. Suddenly, he saw a little cottage gleaming white as the snow among the trees of the forest. "If I have enough breath left with which to reach that little house, I may be saved," he said to himself. Not waiting another moment, he darted swiftly through the woods, the assassins still after him. After a hard race of almost an hour, tired and out of breath, Pinocchio finally reached the door of the cottage and knocked, but no one answered. He knocked again, harder than before, for behind him he heard the steps and the labored breathing of his persecutors. The same silence followed. As knocking was of no use, Pinocchio, in despair, began to kick and bang against the door as if he wanted to break it. At the noise, a window opened and a lovely maiden looked out. She had azure hair and a face as white as wax. Her eyes were closed and her hands crossed over her breast. With a voice so weak that it could hardly be heard, she whispered, "No one lives in this house. Everyone is dead." "Won't you at least open the door for me?" cried Pinocchio. "I am also dead." "Dead? What are you doing at the window then?" "I am waiting for my coffin to take me away." After these words, the little girl disappeared and the window closed without a sound. "O lovely maiden with the azure hair," cried Pinocchio, "open, I beg of you. Take pity on a poor boy who is being chased by 2 assassins." He could barely finish, for 2 powerful hands grasped him by the neck, and the same 2 horrible voices growled threateningly, "Now we have you." The marionette, seeing death dancing before him, trembled so hard that the joints of his legs rattled and the coins tinkled under his tongue. "Well," the assassins asked, "will you open your mouth or not?" Ah, you do not answer. Very well, but this time you shall open it. Taking out two long, sharp knives, they struck two heavy blows on the marionette's back. Happily for him, Pinocchio was made of very hard wood, and the knives broke into 1,000 pieces. The assassins looked at each other in dismay, holding the handles of the knives in their hands. I understand, said one of them to the other. There is nothing left to do but to hang him. We must hang him, repeated the other. They tied Pinocchio's hands behind his shoulders and slipped the noose around his neck. Throwing the rope over the high limb of a giant oak tree, they pulled until the poor marionette hung far up in space. Satisfied with their work, they sat on the grass waiting for Pinocchio to give his last gasp. But after 3 hours, the marionette's eyes were still open, his mouth still shut, and his legs kicked harder than ever. Tired of waiting, the assassins called to him mockingly, "Goodbye until tomorrow. When we return in the morning, we hope you'll be polite enough to let us find you dead and gone, and with your mouth wide open." With these words, they went. A few minutes went by, and then a wild wind started to blow. As it shrieked and moaned, the poor little sufferer was blown to and fro like the hammer of a bell. The rocking made him seasick, and the noose became tighter and tighter, choking him. Little by little, the film covered his eyes. Death was creeping nearer and nearer, and the marionette still hoped for some good soul to come to his rescue, but no one appeared. As he was about to die, he thought of his poor old father, and hardly conscious of what he was saying, murmured to himself, "Oh, father, dear father, if only you were here." These were his last words. He closed his eyes, opened his mouth, stretched out his legs, and hung there as if he were dead. Chapter 16. The lovely maiden with the azure hair sends for the poor marionette, puts him to bed, and calls 3 doctors to tell her if Pinocchio is dead or alive. If the poor marionette had dangled there much longer, all hope would have been lost. Luckily for him, the lovely maiden with azure hair once again looked out of her window. Filled with pity at the sight of the poor little fellow being knocked helplessly about by the wind, she clasped her hands sharply together 3 times. At the signal, a loud whir of wings in quick flight was heard, and a large falcon came and settled itself on the window ledge. "What do you command, my charming fairy?" asked the falcon, bending his beak in deep reverence, for it must be known, after all, that the lovely maiden with the azure hair was none other than a very kind fairy who had lived for more than 1,000 years right here in the forest. "Do you see that marionette hanging from the limb of that giant oak tree?" "I see him." "Very well. Fly immediately to him. With your strong beak, break the knot which holds him tied, take him down, and lay him softly on the grass at the foot of the oak." The falcon flew away, and after 2 minutes returned, saying, "I have done what you have commanded." "And how did you find him, alive or dead?" "At first glance, I thought he was dead, but I found I was wrong, for as soon as I loosened the knot around his neck, he gave a long sigh and mumbled with a faint voice, 'Now I feel better.'" The fairy clapped her hands twice. A magnificent poodle appeared, walking on his hind legs just like a man. He was dressed in court livery, A tricorn trimmed with gold lace was set at a rakish angle over a wig of white curls that dropped all the way down to his waist. He wore a jaunty coat of chocolate-colored velvet with diamond buttons, and two huge pockets which were always filled with bones, dropped there at dinner by his loving mistress. Breeches of crimson velvet, silk stockings, and low silver-buckled slippers completed his costume. His tail was encased in blue silk coverings, which was to protect it from the rain. "Come, Medoro," said the fairy to him. "Get my best coach ready and set out towards the forest. On reaching the oak tree, you will find a poor half-dead marionette stretched out on the grass. Lift him up tenderly, place him on the silken cushions of the coach, and bring him here to me." The poodle, to show that he understood, wagged his silk-covered tail 2 or 3 times and set off at a quick pace. In a few minutes, a lovely little coach made of glass, with lining as soft as whipped cream and chocolate pudding, and stuffed with canary feathers, pulled out of the stable. It was drawn by 100 pairs of white mice, and the poodle sat on the coachman's seat and snapped his whip happily in the air, as if he were a real coachman in a hurry to get to his destination. In a quarter of an hour the coach was back. The fairy, who was waiting at the door of the house, lifted the poor little marionette in her arms, took him to a dainty room with mother-of-pearl walls, put him to bed, and sent immediately for the most famous doctors of the neighborhood to come to her. One after another the doctors came, a crow, an owl, and a talking cricket. "I should like to know, signor," said the fairy, turning to the 3 doctors gathered about Pinocchio's bed. "I should like to know if this marionette is dead or alive." At this invitation, the crow stepped out and felt Pinocchio's pulse, his nose, and his little toe. Then he solemnly pronounced the following words: "To my mind, this marionette is dead and gone, but if by any evil chance he were not, then that would be a sure sign that he is alive." "I am sorry," said the owl, "to have to contradict the crow, my famous friend and colleague. To my mind, this marionette is alive, but if by any evil chance he were not, then that would be a sure sign that he is wholly dead." "And do you hold any opinion?" the fairy asked the talking cricket. "I say that as a wise doctor, when he does not know what he is talking about, should know enough to keep his mouth shut. However, that marionette is not a stranger to me. I have known him for a long time." Pinocchio, who until then had been very quiet, shuddered so hard that the bed shook. "That marionette," continued the talking cricket, "is a rascal of the worst kind." Pinocchio opened his eyes and closed them again. "He is rude, lazy, a runaway." Pinocchio hid his face under the sheets. "That marionette is a disobedient son who is breaking his father's heart." Long, shuddering sobs were heard, cries and deep sighs. Think how surprised everyone was when, on raising the sheets, they discovered Pinocchio half melted in tears. "When the dead weep, they are beginning to recover," said the crow solemnly. "I am sorry to contradict my famous friend and colleague," said the owl, "but as far as I am concerned, I think that when the dead weep, it means they do not want to die."